Welcome to 99 zu 1. My name is Nadim, and today I have Bob Solo from the Russian Marxist Journal with us. This is his avatar. You will see it here. Bob Solo, welcome to 99 zu 1.
Hello, nice to be here, and thank you for invitation.
What is? Can you tell us a couple of sentences what that is?
Yeah, briefly speaking, is Russian Marxist Journal. We are focusing on scientific studies of Soviet and communist past and trying to be scientific journal, something more serious than others. Like, at least we are trying to do that.
Yeah, sounds good. We've been in contact a little bit before. I was since a while looking for some leftists or communists from Russia to speak a little bit about the current crisis, Russia and Ukraine. And you guys have been so kind to join us here. So I'm really, really happy to have you here. It feels like the stuff that you are doing, of course, while much more scientific, mostly than the stuff that we are doing here at 99 zu 1. It feels like we are kind of struggling into the same direction, and it feels really good to have you here. Thank you for that. So before we start about the crisis, maybe a few introductory questions first. Can you tell us a bit about the historical development of the communist left in Russia, how it changed in the years since the fall of the USSR, and what is the current state of the communist movement in Russia? And of course, without compromising your anonymity, where do you see yourself in your situation? What was your part in all of this?
Well, it's reasonable to start with the second question. As in all other countries of the former USSR, the communist movement in Russia is at a hobby group level. We don't have a genuine communist parties in country now. Actually, there haven't been any since the Communist Party of the Soviet Union collapsed. Mm-hmm. I will name it CPSU in our further talk. Then we may go back to the first question about the evolution of the communist movement in post-Soviet Russia. After the CPSU demise, only its empty cocoon left. We mean that Communist Party of Russian Federation, CPRF, you might heard about them.
Yes.
Throughout 30 years, the CPRF completely discredited itself, literally becoming a left hand of the ruling regime. So, yeah. Even though the Communist Party is gone, the demand for justice never went away. And this demand took many strange and schizophrenic social forms, starting from red patriotic role players and national Bolsheviks to social movements like Essence of Time, New Socialism, and National Liberation Movement. There are a lot of them, basically. Several organizations have emerged from the debris of the CPSU. And the CPRF was just one of these. Another one was the so-called Russian Communist Workers' Party. And this party was probably the most critical of the post-Soviet authorities among the CPSU successors. And massive strikes of workers broke out under its leadership in the 90s and early 2000s. But once the so-called stability period had begun, the number of strikes dropped down significantly and the query for an organization of masses diminished. Alongside the CPSU successors, there were also minor organizations which had emerged during the perestroika, such as the, maybe you heard about them, Revolutionary Workers' Party, RVP. Roughly speaking, most of them appealed to activism, handing out flyers near factories, copying the practices of the beginning of the 20th century.
Right.
Yeah, and they neglected any theoretical and ideological work. But these are all relics of the past. So that's the problem. This dead man's spirit walking around in the house, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
You might see in Germany the same thing. Like maybe
Yes.
I really know.
It's a ghost. It's a ghost in Europe, but it's not in the positive sense. No.
Yeah, exactly. Non positive stuff in that. The genuine progress of communist thought, as well as the preparation for future practitioners, takes place either in political clubs and circles or through individual self-education. So maybe, I don't know how it's in Germany, but that's the situation we have in Russia. At the turn of the previous decade, the Russian left got an understanding that Marxist clubs are exactly what they need. But even here, there is a great deal of disagreement. Lots of people just read well-known theoreticons and study basic ideas, and they are not trying to update the theory, So they are just reading old stuff and not trying to think about something new, like, to arrange really some new ideas. So,
Okay.
yeah, like just a small amount of Marxist clubs trying to make it in a scientific way. Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
We might name 2 or 3 of them, including us, and we consider ourselves as a scientific magazine in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, as I said. And just like bottom line, there is no strong workers' movement in Russia right now. The labor unions are still fledgling. So since there are no objective conditions for political activism of the masses, we need to work on the subjective factors. People and theory might help us shape adequate tactics and strategy. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's also our point. We had like a couple of sessions lately with some German groups and also some American groups that take like a very similar stance. Like, for example, one Platypus, maybe you've heard of them, having as their main, maybe it's not a slogan, but like a idea that the left is dead and long live the left, right? So the idea that we have to overcome many of the of the regression that we're doing, like always turning in circles around the same things in the past and not really producing anything new and any new insights as to the situation that we are in. So it seems like this is a global phenomenon, definitely.
Yeah, it's like a common problem everywhere.
Right. So one of the interesting facts, and you already mentioned this, is that there is in Russia a nominally, at least, communist party, and it's even represented in the government, right? So you also already said like what your position towards this party is, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit on this, like what position on the Communist Party in government is, especially while Putin and his government is quite well known for a very hardline anti-communist stance. At least that's what we hear here in Germany.
As you have probably noticed, we are not very complementary to the Parliamentary Communist Party, this CPRF. Yes, there is a Communist Party in Russia, which has a lot of followers. Even though its membership is rising year after year, it's still bourgeois party. Like, don't get us wrong. We do not want to accuse all of these members of inaction and parasitism. There are lots of people in this party who help citizens to defend against illegal takeovers, violations of their civil rights, and social guarantees, and so on. Sometimes they succeed, but this success is always limited and has nothing to do with the most important problem, private ownership. The party refuses to discuss it at all. They avoid speaking of class struggle publicly, at best they label the actions of the authorities as directed against the people. Like, what does it mean? They might tell you that this particular oligarch is to blame, but the CPRF will never claim that the problem is in the very nature of the society that created the said oligarch. Like, indeed, some young communists consider the CPRF a platform for a political activism and the way to somewhat resist the ruling class unlawful policies. However, these people are minority within the party. Most of its members use the party in a bourgeoisie way. Just, for example, to make money. By the way, the richest member of Duma was from CPRF party.
Wow, so, like the richest, one of the richest minister or presidents, like from the government.
Yeah.
He's from the CPRF.
Yeah, that's probably he's the right communist.
Probably.
you always might work better and more. Be effective. So he's quite effective. Huh? Yeah. So, and anti-communist views of Putin face only verbal resistance from CPRF, just only verbal, and even the words eventually turn into silent or even not so silent agreement with the ruling class rhetoric. And the very fact that the CPRF is represented at the highest public level reveals the ambivalence of modern Russia's ideology. It's really ambivalent. Russia is a legal successor of the USSR, you might know. And this is why the government has to both curse the bloody Bolshevik past as a bourgeois state and acknowledge the achievements of the Soviet people. The Russian economy takes advantage of it. It would be unfavorable for the authorities to completely cut ties with the communists' legacy now. Like, it's not reasonable for them. They might lose their legitimacy of ordinary people and in the international community, since Russia is a successor of the USSR. So it's quite dangerous for them.
Right.
It's not really the best way for them to get rid of this past. Even they are trying to do that. They are trying to do that.
Yes.
We can even say that if there was a proper communist party alongside the CPRF, this structure could have been used sometimes as a part of legal struggle. But it's more of an open question right now. In the long run, we obviously have to build an independent organization. There were controversial incidents when the CPRF tried to channel mass protests by convincing people not to rock the boat. We have to make it. Yeah, we have to take it into account. So.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. No, it's really eerie how similar. Of course, there are also differences, but how similar so many things sound to situations that we have here with our nominally left party. But let's not go into detail. We are talking about Russia, so let's talk a little bit more about Russia in general. So why it's not possible to cover now any details or all the details here. It would be interesting to have like a high-level perspective from your side on Russian society and government. And I'm gonna give you a little bit of background why I'm asking this. So, narrative here in Germany that right now, of course, after the war started, but also way before. I mean, let's say like maybe since 2014, is basically that Russia is an oligarchic dictatorship with its democracy nothing more than a farce. Putin is kind of like a Hitler-like fascist, homophobe, racist, egomaniac dictator that basically just enriches himself and his friends while the population lives increasingly precarious situations. And there's also a far-right nationalist ideology grabbing hold of society at large. So more and more fascists and nationalists popping up everywhere. I would like to know, what is your view on that? How accurate is this view really? And how would you complicate this Western judgment on Russia?
Yeah, the biggest question for Western world is, who are you, Mr. Putin? No, such an assertion is a sheer demonization. It's an absolutely sheer demonization. Since your enemy comes from hell, any atrocity against him is justified. It's
right.
The same thing we have been hearing about Ukraine and Europe from our media for the last couple of years.
Right.
Yeah, and Russian oligarchs had been trying to get their own piece of power for a while in the previous decades. So the current authority is a mere agreement between them. You know, as we know, classes make history, not personalities. Anyway, Putin has become an important symbol in Russia. With his rise to power, Russian oligarchs had developed class consciousness. They ought to crack down on all other attempts to redistribute property. Comprador bourgeoisie has total protection from the harsh expansion of foreign capital. Trade unions' activity is limited. The big businesses also benefit from low taxation. No doubt, Russia differs from Europe and the USA in that sense. It has unique features, including how both public and non-public institutions work. Every country has its own features, right? Its own historical context. Russia has gone through the fall of socialism, and Russia is the country that built early forms of socialism. It evolved in the most dire circumstances. Our society is a result of socialist state collapse. We are not Europe, which accumulated its wealth during the colonialism era. We are not USA, which profited from 2 world wars and neo-colonialism. But despite these facts, our society is still capitalist. The Western and Russian propaganda are no big difference. The Kremlin also talks about human rights and freedom, but understands them differently. The authorities rely on conservative ideas. Preserving Russian culture, language, and traditional values. Such rhetoric is the main ideological argument of the elite. They took it from the top of the white movement and kept pushing it down the throat of Russians. And it actually works. Yeah. So, at present, we can say that the Russian government appeals only to the legacy of the monarchist white movement. But evidently, they look in that direction and intend to expand the influence of these traditional values in politics. European tolerance policy has become a bugbear. Or bugbear. Yeah.
A bugbear, yes.
It's mocked and interpreted one-sidedly as something phony and unnatural. It's essential for confronting ideologically the potential foe. Russian TV channels occasionally portray homosexuals and immigrants as a threat. But Ukraine and USA are targeted even more frequently. Most people usually get involved in this theater as observers and hence do not necessarily take everything that is going on seriously. Overall, ideology is constructed the way it does not bug a common person. while providing the bare minimum ideological basis for functioning of the state. Once the so-called special military operation began, we're not allowed to call it another word.
Right.
Political involvement of the population has been growing, as well as the crackdown on all critics of the state. The latter also demoralize people, prevents them from expressing their attitude and organizing themselves to influence this situation. The masses have poor understanding of what's going on. They are disorganized. In the context when the political involvement of the public is at a rudimentary level, the emergence of widespread support of either extreme right or extreme left seems dubious. So that's how it is. And just talking about democracy, a large number of people in Europe are very proud of the fact that they live in a democratic society.
Yes, democratic. Yes.
Yeah. However, the Soviet society, at least at certain periods of its history, was considerably more democratic than the European one. It was a thing until Soviet democracy degraded. Do you follow the idea? We claim of level of democracy it's a dynamic factor. It's really dynamic. The same goes for traditionalism and tolerance towards the so-called minorities. In the 1920s, there were polygamous families in the USSR. The rejection of old patriarchal family was encouraged. This, however, was never static and never will be. So why do we stress this? Why do I stress this? We are not so different from each other. Yeah, democracy and dictatorship, corruption and freedom have nothing to do with nationality. However, the people of the West still regard Russia as a different world. The world with a mad dictator, oligarchy, homophobes. We will uncover a great mystery. There are more homosexuals in Russia than you might think, even among those in power. They just don't flaunt their sexuality, so there is no problem with that. We have no problem with that, actually. The whole idea of Russia being some kind of murder is first and foremost, it's hypocritical. It only divides the workers of different countries. So that's it.
Yes. And I like the Lord of the Rings reference here, Mordor, but that's really what it's supposed to be for us now, which is like this kingdom of darkness.
That's actually what Ukrainian propaganda, official Ukrainian propaganda, using against Russians in Russia. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let's tackle a couple of questions that maybe are a little bit more specific. So, there are Marxists in Europe, which are, let's say, more on the anti-imperialist, or sometimes we call it vulgar anti-imperialist side, which claim that Russia is not an imperialist force, and that only the US basically in their hegemony qualifies as an empire. The argument is that the productivity in Russia is so low, and there is, little financial capital influence. It's not powerful enough, and thereby, at least Lenin's definition of imperialism does not apply to today's Russia. I would like to know what is your analysis here. What is imperialism in your view? How do you define that for yourselves, and how helpful or not helpful is the concept in the first place to understand how Russia fits into this analysis?
Yeah, lesser productivity and influence of the financial capital compared to that of the U.S. does, of the United States. I mean, doesn't mean that Russia is not an imperialist country. The main factors here are the exact characteristics, some of which you may have already mentioned. Quantitative differences are common for contemporary capitalism, since unequal development is one of its key features. Most Russian Marxist academics define Russia as either a country of the capitalist periphery or a country with a transitional economy. Rarely do we find Russia being described as an imperialist country. That's because the majority of these works were written before the mid of 2010s.
Right, before the Ukraine crisis.
Yeah, right. So like they some kind, at some point they are irrelevant, partially.
Right.
We might say. Yeah. There are very few up-to-date analyses. So, when did Russia become truly imperialist? That's an open question. Was the early 2000s that milestone? Was it the mid 2000s or decade later? It's not really important now, because nowadays Russia displays all the features of the imperialist country. Yeah, we are witnessing the establishment of the regional economic bloc, where the Russian bourgeoisie is dominant. The largest Russian bank, Sber, has already transformed into diversified network of enterprises, which includes some manufacturing companies. Russian business is extracting capital from Latin America and Africa. After all, we have the aggressive rhetoric of the past 10 years, the attempts to interfere into the internal affairs of neighboring countries like Kazakhstan, and the territorial claims of the well-known fellow republic, which is Ukraine. There were plenty of reasons to regard Russia as a country of imperialist nature. However, as of now, in the in-depth analysis of imperialist character of the Russian economy has been evaluated only by some non-academic Marxists online, and only over the past 5 years. A comprehensive study of the nature of Russian capitalism and imperialism is yet to be carried out.
Right, and maybe your journal will also host a few of these research questions, because that will be quite interesting to know what's coming out there. So, lastly, let's go a little deeper into what you already started mentioning, this far right phenomenon by talking about the white monarchist idea that is trying to, that the oligarchs try to basically bring back into society, and like it's basically an ideology that is justified or used to justify certain politics. Many Western journalists and commentators ignore or downplay the role and significance of right-wing, hyper-nationalist or fascist elements in Ukraine. We actually made a couple of episodes of this, and how big of an issue actually it can be. And many times, when you want to argue about that as a from a critique point of view, you want to talk about what's going on in Ukraine in terms of the nationalism and the fascism. They use whataboutism and point to the supposedly fascist nature of the Russian state and say, but look at them, they are much worse, and they also have all these fascists, like for example this so-called Wagner group. So I would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on what role does nationalism or maybe even fascism play in the current situation in Russia, and what are the material reasons and circumstances nowadays?
Yeah, of course, we are trying not to be looking like bookworms and speak a little bit less academic, but nationalism is an inherent feature of any bourgeois state. So it's a product of national economy. Fascism is an extreme form of capitalism, targeted at suppressing the workers' movement. Although there are some indications of the emerging fascism in Russia, it's premature to label the country as a whole as genuinely fascist yet. The nationalist sentiments, I think, in Russia, they were in a deep crisis before Crimea and Donbass events. But the threat of a direct military confrontation with NATO has provided solid ground for its development. Unfortunately, the foreign policy actions of the government are widely supported by the masses. Most Russian citizens share paternalistic views, dreaming of a state as powerful as the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union. Many people have a very eclectic view on a history, and hence equate the empire and USSR. So that's a problem. Both states are considered as a single entity, the empire, and in order to spread the concept of the Russian world, the government actively exploits Soviet achievements, devoiding their socialist substance. And today, the ultra-right-wing ideas are more widespread among numerous paramilitary structures, such as mercenary organizations. Those who would kill and die for money, defending the interests of the capital, are much more susceptible to be blindly loyal to it, hence more prone to fascist ideas. But this is usually about historical parallels to the Viking culture, where there is a cult of the warrior.
Okay, interesting. So let's get then to Ukraine. Interestingly, your journal and the activists in your group, you were one of the very few people to actually predict the invasion of Ukraine, the special military operation, right, SMO. Please tell us about your analysis of the conflict. In your opinion, what is the conflict about? Who are the different parties here? And what ultimately is the goal of the current operation in the Ukraine?
Oh, yeah. Many Russian Marxists rejected the idea that the special military operation could ever happen. They supposed that such a step would be disastrous for the Russian capital, and it might jeopardize the status of the ruling class. It was more convenient to think that the devious bourgeois state would calculate all the benefits and stay away from the very risky and depleting conflict. In fact, the contours of economic alliances between imperialist countries are already taking shape. The confrontation has been developing for more than 1 year, and here came its logical outcome, the armed clash. We wrote about this as soon as the Donbass republics were recognized by Russia, right? It was important for us to respond to those who hoped for the bloodshed to stop at last, or lingering conflict to finally come to an end. We wanted to show them that another future was more probable, the one we are currently living in. So far, our analysis only consists of an article about the state recognition. A comprehensive understanding of the objectives and causes of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine requires more detailed analysis. However, we might already notice some apparent outlines of that issue. Let's start with the nominally external factors. Ukraine has a great amount of natural resources. The industrial complex left after the USSR fall. Russian oligarchs have tried to take over these assets since the 2000s, and they are not the only ones who want them. That's why Russia faces such a fierce opposition from the USA and the EU. The Western countries directly supply with weapons and train the Ukrainian army. In addition, Russia and Ukraine produce 60% of the world's neon, which is essential for microchip production. We cannot say for sure whether the Russian leadership took this aspect into account beforehand, but it's a good card to play, actually. It gives an opportunity to put pressure on Western politicians. Moreover, the capitalist center of the world system would prefer to deal with a banana republic rather than a country with a self-sufficient economy and aggressive ruling class. This conflict is a perfect way to destabilize Russia from the inside and bring a puppet government into power. That's why the West supplies the Ukrainian army with technical equipment and instructors so actively. The fun fact is that the Russian government was probably aware of it back in the year in 2014 and 15, and tried to postpone the military solution on Donbass. One can only assume why this has begun just now. And here we are turning to internal factors. The Russian government has been destroying the social sphere, public education, and science for a long time, really. This obviously had an impact on authority ratings inside Russia. War conflicts are often used to get the ratings back on track, tighten domestic politics on a legal basis, and limit civil rights. No time to criticize, complain, we are fighting a tough war. It might have worked if the conflict had ended victoriously in February. Now it doesn't seem to be clear.
Right. And who knows how much longer this might be going on. We might be looking at years here, and then this could very well turn around. One of the professed goals of Russia, or in one of Putin's speeches, I think, and this was also repeated many times, is this idea of denazification of the Ukraine. What do you think of that?
Once again, we will become an academics. Once again, yeah. As Engels said, you might remember that. yeah. As Engels said, no nation can be free if it oppresses other nations. But that's generally true. It would be reasonable to begin with denazification of Russia before implementing it in Ukraine. We have already said that the official Russian ideology is quite ambivalent. Anti-Nazi public image inherited from the Soviet Union, which is absolutely unfair. It's just a part of this ideology, So, no doubt, both Russia and Ukraine have shown signs of fascism and dehumanization. But fascism, in its terminal form, which is an extreme form of bourgeois political system, is possible only when there is a threat for the actual bourgeois system. Organized workers' movement powerful enough to overthrow this system, So,
right.
We actually need the latter for that. That's not the case for both countries, actually. We ought to mention that fascism went further in Ukraine. We avoid communicating and cooperating with Ukrainian Marxists, or even publicly reveal contacts with them. They might become a low-hanging fruit for right-wing activists.
They are basically in danger there, right?
Yeah,
saying,
yeah. There are a few really well-known incidents with that communist activists. One of them being burnt in Odessa, just for example.
Right.
And so, they might become low-hanging fruit for right-wing activists. The Ukrainian government turns a blind eye to the attacks on communists. Kiev itself bans communist symbols and books. It persecutes communists. Anti-communist bias may be found in very post-Soviet country. But in contrast with Russia, their anti-communism is not only driven by the desire to suppress anti-capitalist movements. It is also mixed with the tendency to distance themselves from Russia. Russia is considered the USSR successor, and the latter is now described as a prison of nations. This narrative allows to discourage any pro-communist sentiment in these countries. So that's why they're doing that.
Right. Okay. Another talking point is this, basically this idea of defense and self-defense. So, and while Russia points here a finger at NATO and the West, obviously paints its operation in the Ukraine as a defensive movement, as Russia, basically started the attack in February. NATO and the West downplay and negate their role in this conflict, their historical role in this conflict in the last, let's say, at least 10 years, if not even 20 and 30 years, and point to Putin as being motivated by, we talked about this before, just a megalomaniac urge to power, again, fascism, maybe there's hate, or he's just a madman, or whatever evil or dark ideology leads to this war, and basically cut off any kind of analysis. Like, you can't really talk about history anymore. You can't really talk about what other actual reasons, the materialist reasons for Putin, this government, to go into this war. And I would like to know, what is your position on these propagandist narratives, basically?
The demonization of the enemy, the rise of nationalism, the consolidation of people under freedom, democracy, and tolerance slogans, all of these things are just false consciousness, as Engels said. It's due to the political incompetence of the majority of people. Why is this so? Well, there are certain reasons behind this. We think that the crucial one is that people need simple answers, which at the same time are convenient for the ruling class. Why I'm not rich? Asks a German, French, Russian, or Ukrainian citizen. And someone responds to him or her. Russian or French or German is to blame. This answer implies that the problem might be resolved if we get rid of some bad people. You see, false consciousness doesn't require any mental or moral efforts. You might be a scoundrel, but if you prove that your enemy is even worse, you won't be such a bad person. There is some truth in this rhetoric, but it's only part of the picture. Since the socialist bloc collapsed, NATO has been expanding further to the east. Similarly, the stance of the Russian leadership was steadily changing. At first, Russia had high hopes for a mutually beneficial cooperation with the West. We've been translating some talks between Yeltsin and Clinton, and they wanted to join NATO these times. So, just for example, and they really wanted to be part of Western world.
Yep.
Absolutely, without any doubts. That's true. Russia tried to be the part of Western world, but Russian capital wanted to become a part of the neoliberal world. However, the more confident Russian business felt, the more critical of the Western world the speeches of Putin were. You might remember the Munich conference of 2007. Putin appealed to international law standards, mutual respect, etc. The president delicately expressed discontent with the policy of the West. But it was rather like, don't bother us, you know. In 2014, in Valdai, Putin openly declared that international law is a fake, and there is nothing behind it but the military power of the USA and NATO. From people's perspective, such an evolution in rhetoric may have looked as if Russia became great again. Yeah, and the only problem is that brutal claims don't keep pace with real economical situations. Yeah, the Russian economy has been degraded and becoming more natural, resource-based, neglecting other sectors of it like education and science. It depends not only on what place Russia has in the global distribution of labor, but also on personal qualities of Russian authorities. They are not interested in long-term investment and evolving the industry. Now we can assume that the most profitable natural sector might lose the Western markets. Of course, the USA is trying to make it.
Okay, yeah. Another talking point that we hear a lot is the idea that the invasion could not have been avoided. Like the West couldn't have done anything, that the events and conflicts of the last decade are basically irrelevant. There is nothing that the West did wrong or could have done differently or even can do today to de-escalate the situation, because there is this murderous, irrational, mad King Putin who just wants to eat the country, Ukraine. There is no negotiation or attempts at de-escalation that can stop the situation. Of course, the outcome of this argument is that Russia's operation can only be stopped by the force of war. So this is what this always gets back to. And this is why we need to send heavy weapons, etc., etc. What is your view on that? Was there something that the West could have done or could have been done differently in order to avoid the situation?
Yeah. Russian imperialism currently delineates a zone of its interests over the zone delineated by NATO. Of course, the Russian ruling class is now divided, and some part of it wants to stop the military conflict. Probably the same happens to Western countries. Oh, you might heard that Kissinger already said something like that in Davos Forum.
Right.
It happened just a few days ago or yesterday. I don't remember actually what's the actual date, but the same rhetorics we might hear from Western leaders also. So the outcomes of this conflict will ensue the further development of both NATO countries and Russia. In addition, the point sounds one-sided, as if NATO is forced to operate from a position of strength. Look at the rhetoric of the Western leaders. It almost doesn't react to the statements by Ukrainian and Russian sides about potential ceasefire negotiations, while NATO increases the supplies to the escalation area nonstop, breaking off the relations with Russia in many spheres. It suggests that the interest in the conflict is mutual. Yeah, really, like there's a mutual interest. Each day of the conflict drains Russian social and economic stability down the pipe, working in favor of NATO, of course. If it comes to a crunch, it will be possible to establish here a rule pleasing to Western counterparts.
Regime change, basically. At least that's the theory, right?
Yeah, we might expect it.
Yeah. So in Ukraine, we've witnessed an unprecedented crackdown on communist groups. Since 2015, at least, you've already talked about this. But since the invasion, even now left liberal parties and groups have been forbidden. Can you tell us a little bit now? And this is something that we know here in Europe. I mean, we don't hear that much about it, but we leftists, of course, we have some access to some journalists who report on this. So we know what happened there in the Ukraine, and we hear very little from Russia, because of course that is always the big bad. So what has the current conflict resulted in for communists in Russia, maybe even people like yourself?
Our president made it clear that he is ready to show Ukraine the real decommunization. And he didn't lie. Decommunization has been going on in Russia for many years. Big media companies associated with oil and gas companies shoot videos, write articles and books about the evil and bloody Soviet Union. Streets are being renamed, museums are being closed, Marxists are being prosecuted in universities. Prominent TV figures call for monuments to Nazi collaborators to be placed. Really? So, nonetheless, Soviet symbols are still being exploited. We told you already, Russia cannot deny its Soviet past history. This political move would be like a shot in the own leg. Communists must be careful. Trade unions activism is no longer prosecuted as an administrative offense, but rather as a criminal one. Recently, the label of a foreign agent has come into daily use. The law characteristics of agents are blurred. Even a simple journal may be classified as a foreign agent. The field for legal activity is shrinking.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, that is about the communists and people like yourself. There is also this displaying in Western media, and this is something that also the West doesn't hire, about peace demonstrations, or let's say anti-government, anti-war demonstrations that have been held in Russia. And of course, on top of that, we see a lot of very hard crackdown of Russian police on the protesters. Is there some kind of peace movement at play in Russia? And what would their demands be and their politics be? And how would you, as communists, position yourself towards this peace movement?
Well, anti-war demonstrations are not common. Protesting people are not united, thus we cannot talk about united anti-war politics. Just, to add a few words about that, maybe it's just because many people trying to protest, not because they want to stop the war, but because this war invaded in their own lives, and they just, there's something collective responsibility, or collective feeling, collective feeling to stop the war behind it.
Okay.
It's rather individualistic. Yeah, there are people out of any liberal and leftist party. Protesters explain it. They want to express their solidarity with Ukrainian bomb victims. It's a sort of moral support. We would like to highlight the socialist alternative movement with the Russian Office of International Socialist Alternative. They tried to make a well-organized demonstration. But what's the point of this? If there's no wide support among working people, nothing but ass kicks, fines, and jail times. Really? Like,
yeah, indeed.
But yeah, that's the consequence of this individualism. It gives nothing, while communists keep being generals with no army. Not to mention that those generals themselves are marginalized and separated.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you. That already gave like a very good overview on things in Russia. So I would like to come a little bit towards an end and try to produce some kind of conclusion or outlook. Could you summarize? I mean, maybe this will be now a repetition, but could you summarize one more time for everybody who stayed until the end? How do you understand the current conflict in the Ukraine, and what should an internationalist communist position towards it really look like, in your opinion?
Looking at their international rhetoric and common local conflicts after the fall of the USSR, connected with the redistribution of the property, Russia and Ukraine have been preparing for a conflict for a long time. Ukraine, or Donbass to be precise, became a Pandora box not only of regional imperialism. It appears to be just the beginning of a sequence of bloody conflicts spreading far beyond from the post-Soviet world. First, we must push the workers away from the dominant nationalist agenda and demonization of either side of the imperialist struggle. We must show them that in the end, these conflicts will bring no good. Under such circumstances, close international ties with comrades are vital. We hope that our short conversation will contribute, albeit modestly, to building such ties.
Yes, here. That we hope to, and we hope to also continue collaborating with you guys over there. Still, one last question to give some kind of. I mean, you guys seem to be very good at analyzing and predicting, as you predicted the special operation from happening. So, do you have any kind of feeling, or do you maybe even have a prediction as to how this will play out in the short, mid, and long term, and what should we prepare for in the future?
Exact predictions are a thankless job. They require a close study of the current situation, which will soon be the focus of our work. For now, it's possible to outline some current trends. The conflict is dragging on, which the Russian government seems not to have taken into account. The offense has halted, and should it fail to resume soon, the social situation in the country will worsen. The government appears to be aware of this fact and has chosen to prosecute all opposition. There are some signs of a lack of unity in European policy towards Russia. Countries most dependent on gas imports have to swing between the pro-American and pro-Russian stances. Whether these internal contradictions will develop further, or the countries of Europe will elect a more decisive approach towards Russia, is as of now unclear. Just as is the resilience of Russian society. In any case, as long as the communist movement stands divided, no positive developments are to be expected. The communists will hardly enjoy any facilitation for their work, hence organizational consolidation, theoretical training, and achievement of ideational unity with other Marxists are of utmost relevance. Time is working against us, basically.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Bob Solo. And yes, Bob, we would like to have you on again and talk about, the ongoing conflict, and maybe even other topics. Would be nice to keep up this collaboration with you guys over there.
With great pleasure, we will visit you again, and maybe someone other from our journal will join our conversation next time. So Great. I hope.
And then I wish you all the best. Please take care of yourself and keep up the good work. And let's stay in touch.
But yeah, thanks for attention to you and your subscribers.
Thanks for being here. Thanks everybody for listening. And we are out. Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultrageheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.